demuñu school ñepp xam ne nekkul lu cool ñepp a ngi ragal ñepp xam ne nekkul lu cool ibuloke no moto ni beti sola ibuloke dato ni betoto
Mingi Congo
Lamin
na
Lamin te jibe norin te nyamen Lamin
kabana wulo
kono nyinta mo Lamin
pabilenki
muna ngata afongole
haina
ngata ngoto le Fabrama
Mingi baba nyole
ngoto le Fabrama
namu jumala kan kuma diten
Fabrama
jumala mu
ndele bare mus
Nunda mana
mo kata
jamani mbere
alindo ko
jamani
bari ngoto man kontande
bari jamani bana na mudu ma kontan
ngoto jibe nori nyaala
Lamin ila siran sama ne benki yala so tol sayni no bom nam
itedinte yalo ne Lamin hakkilo diata bake karambugot anu santeng ministry ko di ngole si suoko amake ko do holi
si biton
bagona de
ala ni nyab ala ni ko kede namo
ina karta bulo be damna ala nije
ngodo
nam
feren
jamani mu nekata
ifika Lamin ki wulo ko no nyintay mon ko do fete malo Lamin nyanta sila la be la moy kala karango
jamani karamol be sorande ne ko fasita wulo ko nako
karambugol ma soron ni ko karambugol soron da amake ko ngoli delem ngodo dindi ngo nyanta sila la ala karango la moy ya ben kaben fue man kontaan andamande
alla nyin kombo courant adanda la kombo le soronda doron kamen courant ma rado la kombo e ko ndol fanena karamugol soron Lamin adara lo nyino la amantara fena so kon ala mu nekela
Lamin ite foyde malon kon le sinol be ke kar radio to
nga fine
e ko yana di mo Lamin ya mu na fo
na kan tambita nteri mañing Fatou tambite la sugal ala dinngol bebe siri be la moy ka
Fatou danso am fanan tambita jele ni subala la ngaje dinngol be jet talanta nen kili warol e be seri jele
sa Lamin fadante ku kili wo ke no la ba Lamin bi ka wulo ko no nyin taymo Lamin
amandara fenela
ite dine ko di man si yakari la suno la moy radio to e balon nan
mu ne ka ke afonde ma nyama ni alon
telentel jikot
afonde ma mu ne be ke
ite balon tel be cikritel ni man kara be ku kele yaaje nata kara na mbasa malaya e tarije
kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na raje ni sonka bay ko Lamin ma nyata la wulo ko adu karamu
on koto wole nati ba on ngal ni Lamin kuntal kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e si suwo kono bari ni ko e si suwo kono ibe karangol dike la radio ni telel to hani tele masoto to nyaay man tele soto la bungo bar radio be bulen koto batiri sanga ay si ay alamo
sa do kala nyaadi
kamun ke
la moy lay be mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti jalle be radio ko men ka karandi
ila subject no baby jele baby jele
wala na fadan se wolya ngombe tambi kana ngadi ningol jebe ikadum bungo ko kada ma
asotota
wala de
bari
lafta ala in the every year second wala fourth
muna ni ko nde le sinlo ne ba
nkoto wole fango ye mulindi yalo famo keta bat yin fana bulata ko ko me yen nati jambi Lamin nyanta karana ntel beji ko be nyineka ya bulay kara wulo kono ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje nkoto dinni ngoy si ayala le
daga munda karamo man soro Lamin nyanta kara si suwa ay regula
silale ayala le sido
dal ko korno ko smolon
kilar ya
be ngala ko momo sa mbi do ni kono kera
mengi bruzo
ndebe ko do la da ba rosa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe jele ba do ngamra ko man nembe buljan dala nyara nyar fo ko fendi mo la Lamin tayra ba rosa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya labi tamete ku
mengi mun na re
teku
bari ko do famo ke
imagine nani nyambol si se olle ke je kisiki man si se ol no le kafun ka nyoma bari nyambu kino ni manya na ka fendi
kanko
la
nyambo
nyara ni ko rin fennat nyara nata
bari famo ke da
ngata bungono tambi bungono nyara ngando ko fele ko ke baru nganda ni pelo la ndija
iyo awa better la
bungono bismillah bisu diara
ye fongo tanka sina dolu tanka koro ta koro
Good day, wonderful viewers and listeners. Welcome back to another Literature in English lesson. I am your teacher, Ami Jaite, and then I'm here today to continue from where we stopped. We were dealing with the branches of literature, which we could not because time is our enemy. So we're going to look at another branch of literature that we call prose. Now, prose is a branch of literature. It refers to an extended narrative of fiction in ordinary spoken language without a metrical structure. Prose differs from poetry and drama in several ways. Remember, we told you that the branches of literature are three. Drama, but these three branches are different from each other. So they're different from each other in several ways, which include prose is very elaborate in terms of word usage. Prose explains. It explains vividly all that it is supposed to say, which is different from poetry, which tries to condense and economize words, while drama dramatizes with actions and dialogue, even though they may all be talking about the same thing. So prose is very elaborate in terms of word usage. It explains vividly for everybody to understand. Another difference is that prose is written in sentences and chapters. It is written in sentences, it is written in paragraph, and it is written in chapters. Poetry is written in lines and stanzas, while drama is written in acts and scenes. These are all unique qualities of each of the branches. Prose is divided into sentences, chapters, and paragraph. Poetry is divided into lines and stanzas, and drama is divided into acts and scenes. So these are all unique qualities of each of the branches. We will now look at the features of prose in detail. It says prose uses chapters and paragraph. Like we told you, we have every prose, that is a novel, is divided into chapters. You may have chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but inside of every chapter you have what we call paragraphs. Bring together is what consists a good chapter, but inside every paragraph also we have what we call sentences. The second one says it makes use of narrative style. It explains, like I just said, it explains, it narrates something that has already taken place, so it makes use of narrative style. Again, the idea is connected, not listed. They are connected, meaning from one event you have the order, which are briefly explained, but they are not listed like the way they are listed in poetry or the way they are listed in drama. Again, it does not have a regular rhymic pattern. Unlike poetry is the only one that has rhymic pattern, that makes use of rhyme, but prose does not make use of rhyme, just like drama does not make use of rhyme. It sometimes makes use of dialogue. Like I told you, dialogue is the communication between two or more characters. So poetry makes use of dialogue. Sometimes you see characters talking to each other in a narrative way. From that, we move to the types of prose. Just like drama, just like poetry, prose also has types, and the types are two. There are two main types of prose. The first one is called a fiction and a non-fiction. Prose is divided into fiction and non-fiction. We will now look at the types in detail. Now, fiction is a story from the imagination of the writer rather than the real story. That is to say, fiction is a story that is not true. And there are types of stories that are not true. That is types of fiction. The first type of fiction that we have is fable. Now, fable is a story which teaches moral lesson and uses animals as characters, which makes them deductive. Like we said in drama, fable is a story that uses animals as characters, moral lesson. If any piece of work teaches moral lesson, it is a piece of work that is didactic. So from we move to another type of fiction that is called a novel. Novel is a long narrative story which deals with either historical or imaginary character. It is a long narrative story, very, very long, which deals with either historical, that is, which deals with something that has already taken place in the past, or imaginary character, or when people set imagine and write things. So that is what we call a novel. From a novel, we move to another type of fiction that is called a legend. Now, legend is a very popular and also a very old story that may not be true. It is very popular, very old, that may not be true. Example could be a story of the hyena and the rabbit. It's very popular and very old, but it may not be true at all. From legend, we move to another type of fiction that we call novella. Now, novella is a prose fiction that is longer than a short story, but shorter than a novel. From novella, we move to another type of prose fiction that we call epistolary. Epistolary is a form of prose that is written in the form of a letter. It is a novel, but it is written in the form of a letter. Meaning it can start with Dear Bintu, then it will be a whole book. Sometimes people will wonder and say, what kind of letter is this? Well, it is a novel, but written in the form of a letter. Now, from epistolary, we move to another type of fiction that we call myth. Now, myth is a well-known story which is made up in the past to explain natural events and to justify religious beliefs or social custom. From that, we move to another type of fiction that we call allegory. Now, allegory is a story in which characters and events are symbols of something else. Characters and events will be used, but they will represent something else. That is what we refer to as allegory. From allegory, we move to another type of fiction that we call romance. Now, romance, this is a novel or film about love affair. Romance is a prose or film about love affairs. Now, from romance, we move to another type of fiction that we call sub-story. Now, sub-story is a narrative which is full of pathetic events, primarily meant to arouse sympathy from the audience. It's a story, but it has lot of pathetic events, lot of sympathetic events that is meant to arouse sympathy from the audience. When they are watching it, they really sympathize with certain characters while reading. From sub-story, we move to another element that we call the verisimilitude or the similitude. Now, a verisimilitude or a similitude is a prose or narrative which has resemblance with the truth and therefore appears to be true when it is not. It has resemblance with the truth. It looks alike with the truth, but then actually, in actual sense, there is no truth in it. Example of this is Things Fall Apart. When you look at it, it resembles the truth because it looks like with how our ancestors have been living, but it is not a true story. Now, Things Fall Apart is an example of a verisimilitude or a similitude, Chinua Achebe. And also The Joys of Motherhood, Buchi Emecheta, is also another type of verisimilitude or similitude as a non-fiction. From that, we move to another type of fiction that we call anecdote. Now, anecdote is an entertaining story about a true or real event or about a person. It could be a personal experience or an event witnessed by or related to someone else which serves as a lesson or a revelation. That takes us to the end of fiction. Now we will look at the other type of prose, that is the non-fiction. Remember, we said prose is divided into two, fiction and non-fiction. What you have just seen are the types we are taking other type of prose, the non Remember, we told you fiction is a story that has no element of truth, but non-fiction is the opposite of that. It is unlike fiction. In it, the story told is real story. The story told is real. Often the writer has a taste or experience of most of the main action in a non-fictional book. They are true stories. Sometimes they are stories that are experienced by the writers themselves. That is what we call a non-fiction. So therefore, a non-fiction is a story that is true, and the fiction is a story that is not true. Also, just like fiction, non-fiction also has types. And the types of non-fiction are two. We have the first one that we call biography, and we have another one that we call the autobiography. Now, the biography is a story of a person's life written by another person. If I have to if I have to write a story about Tida Jata, it means that I am given a biography of Tida Jata. But biography comes when Auntie Tida Jata herself wants to write a story about her own self. That means that she is the author and it is her biography. So in short, biography is a story of a person's life written by another person, while autobiography is the story of a person's life written by him or herself. So try to get the difference between the two. From that, we now move on to the narrative method or styles in prose. Every literary work has its own approach. There are approach to drama. Now, prose also has its own narrative method or style that we use. The first one is, because it is mostly narrative, the first one we have is omniscient. We are talking about the narrative techniques that we have. We have omniscient. Now, an omniscient narrator is the writer who tells the story as an unidentified character, claiming to know everything because he witnessed it. So the omniscient narrator is an all-knowing narrator. From the omniscient narrator, we move to another one that we call autobiographical narrator. Now, this is a piece of writing which relates to events in life of people who has written it, as the name implies, author. From autobiographical, we move to another one that we call the first-person narrator. Just like English language, we have what we call the first-person narrator, the second-person narrator, and the third-person narrator. The same thing applies in literature. When we are writing materials, we make best use of these narrative styles, as in first-person, second-person, and the third-person. The first-person narrator is an internal narrator who witnessed an event and consistently refer to him or herself using the person pronoun I or we. When you use I, it means you are referring to yourself, and when you use we, it means you are part of it. So the first person narrator is a person who narrates the event to him or herself using the first person I or we. We have the next one that we call the second person narrator. Now, the second person narrator consistently uses the second person pronoun you, I, we, and the second person pronoun you is the one that we refer to the second person narrator. Now, the third person narrator uses the pronoun he, she, or they. We are talking to them now. We have the types of prose passages. There are types of prose passages, and the first one that we have is the narrative style. Now, the narrative style of prose passage is a passage with a clear storyline. It is usually an account of a real or imaginary event. It includes historical writing or current issues. That is the narrative. Hence the word narrative. It means you will be narrating something that has already taken place, but it has a very clear storyline. Narrative Move to another style that we call the argumentative style. Now, this is a form of prose work which deals with discussing and arguing on a specific debatable issue. What we are trying to say is that these are form of prose written, but in an argumentative way. Maybe the writer wants to argue about an issue, that is why we call it a specific debatable issue. Maybe the person wants to convince an issue that has been causing controversy, so it is referred to as an argumentative style passage. From that, we move to another type that we call the descriptive style. Now, the descriptive style is a form of prose work which gives a detailed description of events, people, and place. Hence, it describes. The expository type. Now, the expository type is an expository passage. The writer explains, discusses, and interprets an issue for the purpose of making it clearer and more understandable. Just like English language, we have different types of essays. In literature also, we have different types of prose passages that are not argumentative, descriptive, expository, and we have another one that we call the scientific style. Now, the scientific style is a particular write-up which deals with specific or technical issues. This is an issue connected with science and technology. When people want to write about issues that are in line with technology or that are science and technology, that is what we refer to as a scientific style, meaning the writer wants to talk from the scientific point of view. Again, another type that we call the dramatic style. Now, the dramatic style, these are dramatic passages, are those extracted from plays, usually from particular scenes of actions. So these are the types of prose passages that we have. From those explanations, we will now move on to the elements of prose. Just like drama and poetry, prose also has its own elements, which we are going to be discussing shortly, so follow. The first element that we have is characters. Now, remember what we said, characters are people who act, people, objects, or animals who act in a play. There are two types of characters. We have the main character and the minor characters. So, we are going to look at them in detail. The first one we have is the protagonist. Who do we refer to as the protagonist? Protagonist is the hero or heroine of the story, meaning the most important character in a play is the person we refer to as the protagonist. From the protagonist, we move to another element that we call an eponymous hero or heroine. Now, an eponymous hero or heroine is the character in a play or book whose name is used as the title of the book. Example is Harry Potter. Harry Potter is a character in a book, but then his name is used as the title of the book itself. So, Harry Potter is an eponymous hero, and when it is a woman, we use eponymous heroine. That we move to another element that we call antagonist. Now, remember I told you the protagonist is the most important in a play. So we have the antagonist. Now, the antagonist is the enemy of the protagonist. Like we told you in drama, he always works against the interest of the protagonist. Another one we have is the conflict. Remember, conflict is the problem between the protagonist and the antagonist. So just like it, those also have what we call some elements that it shares. So we have conflict. Also in novels, we have conflict between two or more characters. So the problem between two or more characters is what as the conflict. From the conflict, we have another one that we call the plot or the saga. Plot or saga is the arrangement of events in a literary work. From that, we move to theme. Theme is the central idea in a story. It tells us what the story is all about. From the theme, we move to another element that we call setting. Now, setting refers to the place and the time that an action takes place. From setting, we move to another element that we call chapter. Remember, chapter is one of a part that the book is divided into. Remember, I told you prose is divided into chapters and paragraph, poetry into lines and stanzas, drama is divided into acts and scenes. So chapter is one of the parts that a book is divided into. We have the next element that we call a paragraph. Paragraph is a section of a piece of a writing. Inside every chapter, you have what we call paragraphs. Paragraph here refers to the combination of sentences together. From paragraph, we move to another element that we call the prologue. Now, is a speech or a section of a text that is introduced in a play. Remember, it is the introductory part of the book. Now, that is what we call the prologue. It also explains what to read, what you're supposed to know as you proceed with your reading of the book. That is what we refer to as prologue, because it is the introductory section of the book. Now, from the prologue, we move to another type that we call the epilogue. Now, the epilogue is a text or speech which is added to the end of the book or play as a conclusion. It is just added to the, so prologue and epilogue are opposite. Whereas prologue comes as an introductory text, epilogue comes at the end, added to the book, and it serves as conclusion. Now, from that, we also have another common element that we call a flashback. Now, this is a scene that returns or recall to the past. While characters are communicating or while the plot is moving, some characters tend to think about what past, and it interrupts the future, that it interrupts the present situation. That is what we refer to as a flashback. So, from that, we move to another element that we call suspense. Now, suspense is a state of anxious expectation which arouses and sustains the eagerness of the reader or the audience to the very end. That is to say, users, very intelligent writers, use suspense to make you read the book to the very end by suspending vital information that you want to know. They might suspend it, and when you think that it is now time that I know about this, they now move it with unnecessary actions or maybe sometimes use it by bringing their advertisements or whatever, thereby putting you, the reader, or the suspense is the anxious eagerness that is put into the audience to the very end. We have another element that we call the tragic flaw. Now, the tragic flaw is the weakness or the mistake in a character that causes his tragic death. The mistake that the character does, it could be maybe his likeness for women, his likeness for money, or his short-temperedness. That could be his tragic flaw. The tragic flaw of a character is a weakness or the character that causes his tragic death. From tragic flaw, we move to another element that we call a novelist. Remember, a novelist is a person who writes a novel. A person that writes a novel is called a novelist. A person that writes a drama is called a dramatist or playwright. A person that writes a poem is called a poet. So take note. So a novelist is a person who writes a novel. We have another element that we call diction. Now, diction is the choice of appropriate words and their effectiveness in conveying the desired message, meaning, and effect. What I am trying to explain here is that all of us, you have different dictions, and writers may want to use different diction. They might want to use simple words that everybody will read and understand. They might also want to use very complex words. So every diction has its own audience. So I will want to use a very simple English when I am writing. I want everybody to read and understand. Maybe I might want to use a very complex English that people will not also understand. So diction is the writer's choice of words that he wants to use in conveying the message to the audience. We another one that we call a parable. This is another element that we call a parable. Now, a parable is a short story which is told in order to make a moral or emphasize a religious point. When we want to talk or take reference from a religious point, or we want to emphasize a point, that is what we refer to as a parable. We move to another element that is called a synopsis. Now, a synopsis is a summary of a longer piece of writing or work. Normally in school, your teacher might ask you, maybe after reading the novel Native Son, your teacher might ask you to write a summary of it. Sometimes they ask you to write a reflection of it, meaning sometimes you call it plot summary. That is what we refer to as synopsis. That is the summary of a longer piece of work. Synopsis, another element that we call author. Now, author is a person whose job is writing of books. The person whose job is writing of books is the one that we refer to as author. Now, from author, we move to another element that we call parody. Now, this is a work or performance that imitates another work or performance which ridicules or irony. Takes us to the end of the lesson. Time is our enemy, so when next we meet, we shall continue from where we stopped.